Welcome, my friends. This is See You Next Time. What a delight it is to have you back. Today's excursion is a trip back into the realm of people asking questions of atheists. Things like, why don't you believe in the all-powerful character from my favourite book? Come on, my parents taught me about it when I was just a wee impressionable bairn, so it obviously must be true. I mean, it's a powerful argument, is it not? Let's jump into it.
Quick question for you. If you're an atheist, why do you not believe in God?
Good question. Well, it's the only reasonable question when you're talking about atheism, and I'll give you an answer. It's down to lack of evidence.
And if you don't believe in God because you say the book is written by man,
I've never heard anyone say that they're an atheist solely because people wrote the Bible. It's a weird take. But I will admit the fact that we don't know who wrote most of the books of the Bible, or when they were written, definitely throws some doubt on its veracity.
why do you believe in evolution? Because that was also made up by a guy, I think.
Are people really this stupid? I find it odd, but interesting, that a lot of theists on the internet have a tendency to apply the idea of a sacred text to scientific concepts like evolution, as if biologists worship at the altar of Charles Darwin and treat On the Origin of Species like the Bible. It was published nearly 200 years ago. There's been 1 or 2 million advances in the field since then, like, I don't know, the structural determination of DNA, genetics, embryology, computer simulations.
3 hours later.
Large-scale recombinant protein production, gene knockout, high-throughput screening, combinatorial protein expression, and synthetic enzymology, for example. I guess, though, if you've been brought up with the idea that a book you're never going to read cover to cover has to be some sort of guiding beacon for your life, it's probably pretty hard to shake that off.
One of the most unsettling questions an atheist has to answer.
Questions an atheist has to answer. Pretty sure that question is, do you believe gods exist? That's it.
Is there meaning to life?
This and everything else has nothing to do with atheism and everything to do with an individual's particular outlook. Like this, right? It would be illogical for me to say atheists believe that people who wear their baseball cap backwards are complete fuckwits with limited mental capacity. However true that may be. But if I were to say, you wearing your baseball cap backwards gives me the impression that you're an intellectually subnormal asshat with a stupid grin and a face that looks perfect for breaking in a new cricket bat, that's an observable, testable fact. But it's not based on my lack of belief. Get it? Yeah, probably not. Never mind.
One of the world's most famous atheists, Richard Dawkins, wrote a book called A River Out of Eden, A Darwinian View of Life.
This is another example of treating science like religion.
And in it he says, the universe that we observe has no purpose, no good, no evil, just pitiless indifference. That is the consistent view of atheism, that life has no meaning or purpose.
No, that's the view of Richard Dawkins at that time in that book. Though I think it's a fair assessment. He's not talking about life, he's talking about the physical state of the universe and saying it has no teleological intent behind it. We're not on the yellow brick road and there's no wizard behind the curtain as far as we can see.
But we don't live that way. We live as if things matter in this world. We live as if life actually has meaning.
Exactly. Theist or atheist, we don't live that way, which perhaps should indicate that people construct their own meaning to life, and that if you want things in life, whether physical, social, spiritual, or whatever, you might have to do it yourself rather than assuming there's some objective purpose for you and waiting for God to
fix it for you, and you, and you.
And you have meaning and are here for a reason. Everybody on this earth exists for a purpose, and we're created by God and for a relationship with God. That Jesus created you specifically with value, with dignity and worth, and that your life actually has meaning.
If there really is a God-given purpose for each and every person, it'll lead to some disturbing conclusions around God's character. It would necessarily mean that he actively aids corrupt megachurches to scam money out of the naive and vulnerable, and just likes to watch prolific abusers fiddle kids.
Jim has fixed it for you, and you, and you.
Follow for more.
Nah, you're alright, thanks.
Best questions to ask an atheist? What do you mean by atheism? When did you become an atheist? Did you ever believe in God? What's your experience with Christians? What, if anything, might cause you to reconsider your beliefs?
Can't really argue with this. These are pretty reasonable questions.
Those are the kinds of questions I like to begin with. Now, eventually, I want to get to the big question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Where did life come from? The origin of consciousness, objective moral values and duties, and who is Jesus? But to me, those questions are often downstream from first getting to know the person and hearing their story.
I mean, that's fine, but what he's describing is just a conversation, one that's not about atheism. It's a conversation about origins, and these are undoubtedly interesting questions to ponder and discuss, but a lot of theists seem to think they're kind of gotcha questions, because as things stand, we don't have full and complete answers to them. Perhaps we never will. This lack of completeness is commonly then pitted against the religious answer, as if God is sufficient explanation for anything. Also, maybe I'm being too cynical, but it sounds like he's guiding people to enter conversations and feign interest in a person for the sole purpose of disregarding what they're saying and godding at them.
Why are you the way that you are?
No, God! No, God!
My challenge for atheists is this. When you're dealing with the topic of God's existence, Jesus' resurrection, the evidence for the Bible, that sort of thing, no sarcasm, no self-righteous posturing allowed.
That sounds great, you impudent child.
I think,
Really?
if you watch a debate between a Christian and an atheist, you will see that the vast majority of the stuff that comes off the atheist side is sarcasm and self-righteous posturing.
I think that's kind of fair. But I counter with the fact that a lot of the theistic side comes through with a superiority complex.
And if you just take those two things away, that kind of mockery and scoffing, it has a very different effect on you, and you can maybe see clearly enough to at least weigh the evidence thoughtfully.
Mate, do you understand why people mock the concepts you're talking about? It's because they are laughable. If there was actual evidence, you might have a valid point, but the arguments for Christianity, for example, generally come down to some blokes, no one knows precisely who, a few thousand years ago, no one knows precisely when, wrote a book that says a thing. How can you do anything but mock and scoff? Take Noah's Ark, for example. It's a story shamelessly ripped from the epics of Atrahasis and Gilgamesh, which were written about 1,000 years prior, and it describes how one family built a wooden boat that would last through 40 days of terrifying storms and the subsequent year or so on an earth where the highest mountains were submerged in water. Not only that, but they carried 2 of every kind of animal, or 14, depending on which version of the story you choose to read. It's a great story, and a great film directed by Darren Aronofsky, but obvious bollocks in the did it actually happen department. Yet there are great numbers of people who believe that it's actual fact and are willing to take a stand and die on this hill. Well, these mountains of Ararat, I guess. Despite the actual fact that it's impossible and doesn't line up with what we know of Earth's history. Given that, how can we do anything but mock and scoff? Also, piss off. Don't tell me I can't take the piss, you cretin.
Hey, atheists.
Hey girl.
I have a question.
Okay.
So you believe the universe is a coincidence
Not the word I'd use, but go on.
and without a creator. But can this simple food be without a chef?
Why waste time? Say lot word when few word do trick.
This food. Food needs chef. You know chef. God chef. You haven't used your intelligence to get by in life, have you?
How does that work?
This is such a lazy rendition of the watchmaker argument, I'm not even going to deign to give it a response. Without question, this'll come up again in the future, and I'll deal with it then.
These are 3 questions that atheists are afraid to answer. And the last question will probably stump you.
I'll bet it will. Helm.
If God isn't real, then how did this entire universe form?
Oh, he's a moron. Well, as far as I understand it, our universe arose from the Big Bang, the inflation of a tiny little speck which was infinitely dense. I'll leave you to draw your own comparisons with this guy's intelligence.
Nextly, who was the first man, and how were people created?
The first man was called Ugg, and people weren't created. They're the product of evolutionary cycles going back over 10 years.
Lastly, if Jesus wasn't born 2023 years ago, then when did we start keeping track of the Common Era calendar year?
Oh, fuck off. This is just baloxical rage bait. The use of BC and AD came into play around the 6th century when a monk named Dionysius Exiguus was tasked with creating a method to determine the date of Easter. He calculated when Jeebus was born and set that as 1 AD. Our chirpy tank-topped theist friend here, I'd say he could have just Googled this, but I'm not sure he has the wit. I think he probably fell on his phone while masturbating and accidentally created this video.
If you're a Christian, put God is good in the comments, and if you're an atheist, answer one of my 3 questions in the comment section.
No. But you, my lovely viewers, the best anagram of Jeebus is my homeboy in the comments gets a mention next time around.
It's not my responsibility to prove that God doesn't exist. It's your responsibility to prove that God does exist.
Yep, I'd agree with that.
Except the rule of thumb across every single discipline of science, across the entire world of rationality and logic, is that a thing cannot cause itself. Time cannot cause itself. Space cannot cause itself. Materials cannot cause themselves. Matter cannot cause itself. Energy cannot cause itself. You need something that is extremely powerful outside of energy, outside of time, therefore timeless, outside of matter, therefore immaterial, to cause it.
Now, I don't know what materials he's talking about, but ignoring that, I'd broad strokes agree with this. In this little old universe we live in, matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed, only changed in form. And I'm no physicist, but I'd say the same goes for space and time. Though I am curious about what happens at the edges of the universe, if such a concept is reasonable. And it goes without saying that any sort of entity that can interact with space and time and matter and energy and materials, and, I don't know, say has a mind, also cannot create itself. I don't know why I mentioned that. No one's just going to assert something like that, are they?
So are you defining God as like...
The Holy Quran defines God as the cause of all causes, the initial cause.
Oh, well, that's on me.
I mean, if that's your definition of God, then I can't refute that, obviously. Because of course I can't contest that, like, I mean, what you said is irrefutable about the nature of causes, right? Obviously.
Rather than irrefutable, I think the term is unfalsifiable gubbins.
But beyond that, right, it's like a matter of, like, objective morality, for instance, is intrinsically related to the question of God.
Sorry, what? Is this a bit? He's either gone off on some sort of non sequitur out of nervousness, or they've done some really dishonest editing.
But if the task is to prove that God exists, you're not proving him wrong.
Yep, if you define God into existence with some sort of baseless, unfalsifiable assertion, then you, win. If this is supposed to be some sort of gotcha slam dunk, it's failed miserably. The argument is, once again, I believe, therefore true. Look, my old book says a thing. Well, that's a hell of a convincing argument. Well, now wasn't that fun, everybody?
No, wait, the other thing. Tedious.
Lots of lovely conversations with people who are utterly convinced that their favourite character from their favourite book has come to life and talks to them. Now, I'm not saying that it's not true, but I am saying that there's no good evidence for it. Believe whatever you like and live life how you want to live. Just don't be a condescending prick about it. That is my job. And remember, most importantly,
ding-a-ding-dang, my dang-along-ling-long.
Say you next time.